So it's all happening. Meanwhile, for the first time ever, the UK has played host to a flat Earth convention. Organisers of the event say growing numbers of people believe that mainstream science has got it wrong and the Earth is actually not round. Fueled by social media, it seems more and more people are attracted to the often derided flat Earth view. More than 200 people turned up at the convention in Birmingham last weekend, and they were there to hear speakers present their theories on why the Earth is definitely flat. It was 2,000 years ago when the Greeks first put forward the then alternative theory that the Earth was round. The first successful navigation of the globe was made by Ferdinand Magellan in the 16th century, and the first image of Earth from space was taken, of course, in 1946. But the flat earthers say it's way more complicated than that. You may be somebody who has felt suspicious about the shape of the Earth. Do call us 08000 288 291. You'll get a hearing here, I promise. We were going to speak to an NHS manager who believes that the movement of the moon from his back garden shows that it suddenly appears and disappears, and this proves the Earth is flat. He's now not available. But Jason Disbury is in Malden in Devon, and you've been converted to flat Earth theories about a year ago, Jason.
Yeah, that's right. I stumbled across Eric Dubay's 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Ball. And like most of your listeners, when the first 10 minutes of that, I turned it off and thought, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely stupid. But I had an awful sleep that night, and I constantly thought about it. And in the morning, I finished the rest of it's a two-hour-long video. And boy, there's a lot of things in there that kind of make so much sense. But I still wasn't convinced, because it has to be nonsense, doesn't it? It has to be. So,
well, I don't want to reply to that because obviously you believe it's not nonsense. The Earth is flat. I gather you're currently on a yacht.
I'm currently on a yacht inside Penzance Harbour.
Are you staying in the harbour because of the danger of going over the edge?
Well, why do you think there is an edge? Could it not be infinite?
To explain, because the problem with the flat Earth theory in the past has always been that if Magellan sailed round the world and didn't go off the edge, that was kind of the end of it. But you believe it's possible to just keep going, is that right?
Well, not sailing-wise. There is an ice wall, whether it be a beach of ice or a 200-foot ice wall. Water has to be contained. We know this. You can't have water falling round balls.
I suppose gravity might be pulling it into the ball.
But there is no proof of gravity, as in a force that pulls. All we have is what we all know to believe is density and buoyancy. There is no pulling force. It hasn't been proven that. I think it was Henry Cavendish that tried to prove this, and has never been repeated successfully, this experiment.
So, in other words, you don't think gravity exists?
No, definitely not. It is density and buoyancy.
Okay, and if you fall out of a tree, that might convince you that it exists or not?
Well, the fact that my molecules in my body are heavier than the air around just suggests that I'm more dense than the air around.
Got it. Okay, I understand that. So when you were watching your YouTube video and you had the 200 proofs and you were very sceptical at first, and then, Jason, about 10 minutes in, you just were hit by, I think this is right. Is that right?
Well, after that, I did 4 months of research. I had a business. I put that on hold. I did 18-hour days of studying this silly, ridiculous subject, and then found that I come to the conclusion with my friends and family and told everybody, definitely, 100%, the Earth is flat.
I guess the primary objection is the really simple one, that when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and he looked back at the Earth, it did seem to be round.
Well, we don't believe that they ever went to space. Neil Armstrong and many others, have they ever done a 360-degree video camera of around? No. Why do we see waving flags? Why?
I want to swing it around Perpendicular to the camera. Okay. It's pretty good. Thanks, you stand there. Let me get up on the high part. Okay. Gee, I wish we had color.
Why do we see lots of different shadows? Why do we see no dust particles on the lander's legs? No blast crater underneath? We don't believe that they ever went to the moon.
So you think it was done in a studio?
Definitely, most definitely.
Right. The other one is, I suppose, if people think about people who go maybe on a flight to America or something like that, and they look out of the plane window and the Earth has a curvature.
No, some people do claim that, but if you look on most of the windows, they have a small hole on the window,
yes,
which will create a difference between the pressure of the window. The window is shaped to the fuselage of the plane. That's where they get in some sort of fisheye view.
I see. So that's basically the curvature of the glass that I'm seeing there.
That's right.
And if I punched out the window, the view would change.
What I'm saying is that the same photographs and pictures that are on land, it's curving on land. The same pictures.
Okay. When I mentioned you're on a yacht and you say it's too far to go to find the edge, but the edge isn't something you fall off, you said. The edge is a big ice wall.
We don't know this. We've never been. We're not allowed to go there. There's an Arctic treaty in place signed by, I believe it's somewhere around about 50 countries, and it stops anyone from actually going there.
So I see. So people are in on this?
Oh, yes, most definitely.
So what, politicians and stuff?
Well, I mean, I can't name names because I wouldn't know that. No one's ever been taken to court or anything.
Yeah.
We do know that NASA is a big part of this deception.
So Donald Trump becomes U.S. president. They sit him down. They say, okay, we're going to brief you on a load of stuff. We're going to brief you on, the situation in the Middle East and what we're doing about ISIS and where the nuclear weapons are. And one more thing, by the way, we should mention the world is flat. No one knows. You now know where the ice wall is, and we can't stop anyone finding out.
Yeah, why would they tell him?
Right. So so he doesn't know, but there's a. Well, I think the reason is because all these countries are in a kind of treaty to prevent people visiting the edge of the world. That's the reason.
Well, that's right. I mean, this treaty was set up before even, I think it was in the 50s, before we even had the thought of conservation of animals and plant life and that. And yet that treaty was still put in place. Why? We had Admiral E. Byrd went down there for the U.S. Navy.
Uh-huh.
He went beyond the poles. He says in an interview, you can check this out on YouTube. He's on an interview and he says that there is more land beyond the poles, with more mineral opportunities. And you check this out. The interview's on YouTube right now. Admiral E. Byrd.
Thank you very much. You weren't at the convention yourself, were you?
Love to have gone. I've got friends there. I'd say I've been sailing. I just did a 27-hour single-handed sail around the Bristol Channel all the way around Land's End and here. I was a little bit tired, just waiting for the weather to break, and then I'm off again.
Okay, Jason, thanks so much for talking to us. All the best.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
There we go. Jason Disbury, absolutely certain the world is flat. George Ezra Paradise. He's not saying what shape it is. So we're talking to Jason Disbury, who believes the world is flat and thinks there is a conspiracy to stop us finding the edge of it. And we're mentioning this for serious reason, that there's been a convention in Birmingham for flat earthers and 200 of them turned up. And Heather Cooper is a space expert. And you're slightly mystified by how these ideas persist.
I was actually in fits of convulsions of laughter, to be honest. And I wish my best to Jason, by the way, and hope his yachting goes well. No, it is, as you said, to begin with, the Greeks 2,000 years ago noticed that the Earth was actually round, because when the moon is eclipsed, you could actually see the round sphere of the Earth projected on the shadow that eclipsed the moon.
On the possibility or the falsity, of the moon being a sphere. The moon is 100% absolutely not spherical, and any lunar eclipse proves it. And you can prove it too. All you need is a light source and two spheres. On the right, I'll be showing video footage of past lunar eclipses that we are all familiar with. And on the left, I will be showing what a shadow moving over a sphere actually looks like. A lunar eclipse is not, I repeat, is not a shadow of a sphere or anything else circular moving across a spherical object. How do I know? There are 4 critical points of observation everyone should be looking at, and I like to call these the conformation to surface factor, the shadow diffusion factor, the sine wave or S factor, and the reflected light factor. Firstly, I would like to point out the consistency of how a shadow naturally moves along varied surface types. This is the conformation factor. A shadow will conform to any shape that the surface takes, thus, in a way, revealing the true shape of an object. If a shadow moves along something rigid like stairs, it will take the stairs shape, revealing the level differential from step to step. If a shadow moves along a concave object like a bowl, the shadow will stretch and skew, revealing the concavity of the bowl. If a shadow was to move over the surface of a sphere, it would stretch and skew in a spherical manner, wrapping and receding as it bevels and distorts
No, great.
along the
Thank you very
sphere's
much.
surface. Note that this does not
Okay then,
and has
thank you.
never
Bye.
happened on the surface of the moon during an eclipse. Which brings us to our next factor, the shadow diffusion factor. Note, the shadow is more crisp on the edge of the bowl than it is in the lowest portion of the bowl, and sharpens as it rises back up to the edge or the source of the shadow. Note also that on a sphere, the shadow is most diffused or scattered around the edges as the sphere's surface recedes, and it is the most sharp or defined on the closest portion of the sphere. This is because the closer the source of the shadow is to the surface, the more defined its edges. The further the source of the shadow is from the surface, the larger and more faded or diffused it becomes. Another way to say this is if you place an object on a surface with a light source above, the object's shadow will appear most sharp when the object is at rest. But lift the object closer to its light source, and you will see the shadow lose its crisp edges, and dull or fade away, sometimes to the point where little to no shadow remains. This is the shadow diffusion factor, and in conjunction with the first factor, the conformation to the surface factor, the shadow not only rises and falls, stretches and skews with the surface, but also sharpens and dulls. These 2 factors are almost all we need to find the true topography or shape of the moon. Yet one factor is missing. This is called the sine wave factor or S factor. Because the moon is said to be a sphere, the shadow that is projected onto the moon should also take on the characteristics of the sphere. This critical factor does not appear on the moon's eclipses whatsoever. The sine wave factor, or the S factor, is what happens as an object, round or straight, spherical or bent, passes over a sphere's surface. As the shadow moves onto a sphere, it is wrapping around its curve. Starting from the outer edge and moving towards the middle, the shadow takes on the spherical contour and bends upward at its height, then falls backwards in a barrel-distorted manner. The shadow will always follow the closest edge due to perspective. The shadow will continue to create the S shape until it reaches the halfway point. As the shadow moves beyond the halfway point, it begins to bevel outward again in a barrel distortion manner. When a shadow moves along a 3D sphere, the center or closest part of the sphere to the observer is the most flat, and the shadow's shape and size the most true to life. The sphere will never be flat, but the bigger the sphere is, the less acute the angle of its curvature. So, because the innermost portion of the sphere is the closest to the observer, the less curvature is observed. However, when we observe any lunar eclipse, there is no wrapping, stretching, skewing, sharpening, or dulling of the shadow. In fact, every single lunar eclipse looks as if there is one flat disk moving across another flat disk. As the circular shadow moves along the moon, it maintains its circular shape the whole way at the same pace. No stretching, no skewing, no sharpening or dulling. Hopefully you all understood that, as it was quite hard for me to put into words. Those three factors are good enough for us to see that the moon is not a sphere, but one factor is needed to realize the moon's surroundings, and that's reflected light. When another object under the same light source is in close proximity of the object in question, i.e. the moon, it should have light bouncing off of the earth and reflecting onto the moon. When another object under the same light source is in close proximity of the object in question, it should have light bouncing off and reflecting onto it. What I mean is this. The closer another object comes to the sphere, the brighter the light it's reflecting will appear. In the made-up heliocentric lie, they tell us that the moon is reflecting the light to the earth. But what about the bigger object, the earth? Does it reflect and bounce light to the moon? It should, but it doesn't. Because if it did, we would then have no new moon phase, and instead more of a dull moon phase or a dim moon phase. Meaning, as the moon wanes to darkness, it should then be illuminated by the earth. We should still be able to see the same face of the moon that we see every day, because the moon is always facing us. However, it should be dimmer and not luminous, because the earth should reflect its massive light towards the dark moon, especially when the moon is further and closer to the earth on its supposed elliptical path. It should brighten and dim in its new moon phase. I repeat, speaking exclusively from new moon to new moon, the moon itself should still be visible on that new moon phase, transitioning from dim to slightly brighter, back to dim, as the moon moves in its elliptical orbit. The object also should reflect the color of its surface and the color of its light source. A gold chain will reflect gold. A green ball will bounce green light, and its reflection on the object will be green. The sun's light is yellow or warm, while the moon's light is blue and cool. Astronauts say the moon is black and white, whatever that means. But if that means it's a scale of grays running from white to black, then it is impossible for the moon to change the sun's light from a warm color and temperature to a cool color and temperature. Yes, the moon's light is colder than the moon's shade. I can understand the moon cooling down the sun's rays and making it less hot, but in no way is it possible for it to actually make the sun's rays colder than the shade at night. Meaning, if you stepped into the moonlight at night, the temperature of the sun's rays reflecting off the surface of the moon and onto your face, or thermometer, should be greatly reduced, but not colder than if there was no moon at all. When the moon comes out at night, the temperature drops because of the moon's light. This has been confirmed by many experiments using digital thermometers. But staying on course, there is no sign of a reflected light being thrown onto the moon by Earth. What does this mean? This means that the new moon has actually disappeared. While the moon is waxing and waning, we can see the rest of the moon that is not illuminated. However, when there is a new moon, or no sunlight being reflected, we do not see a dim spherical object traversing our sky. In fact, In the daytime, we should still see a dim object traversing the sky, but we have never seen either of these things in our realities. Can you ever remember seeing a dim, non-luminous moon high in the sky at the new moon phase? I repeat, at the new moon phase, not while it's waxing or waning, and not when it's near full. Have you ever seen a dim, non-luminous moon high in the sky at the new moon phase? Now that this information is being brought to light, you will never be able to help but notice something you've never noticed before. That on an eclipse, the shadow has never stretched along the surface of a spherical moon. No stretching, no skewing, no sharpening in or fading away. Not obscured and distorted in sine wave-like motions. No light reflecting onto the moon from Earth. Nothing. Not a single shred of evidence remains that the moon is a spherical body orbiting around or above our Earth. This 100% discounts and debunks any further argument or perspectives that hold to our moon being a sphere in the sky or reflecting the sun's light. This information is in line with the laws of the reflector. The reflector can only reflect light brilliantly if the surface of the reflector is concave, but the outside of the sphere is convex, and convex surfaces only reflect a portion of the light back to the viewer's eye. But a concave surface reaccumulates the spreading light, or reconcentrates the light back to the observer's eye, whereas the convex surface, like the surface of a ball, further scatters the light. If the moon were over 250,000 miles away, then we would only see a portion of the moon, which we would call the hot spot, or the bright spot, or the highlight of the sphere. But there are no hot spots or highlights or bright points on the sphere of the moon indicating the sun's direction. Instead, we have a perfectly evenly lit, luminescent moon that gives us cold blue light. In fact, when we look at a full moon, it appears to be flat because the edges of the moon are just as bright as the center or any other part on a full moon.
And as you said, in 1521, Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigated the world, proving it was completely round. And as far as conspiracies go, NASA's naughty, and no doubt the European Space Agency's naughty as well. But remember, back in March, Elon Musk managed to send his amazing rocket, his Falcon Heavy, into space. And it's on its way towards Mars. And he took some photographs of it from his car. He wasn't in the car, but the car took photographs. Yeah. And you could see the Earth was definitely round. And in fact, if you travel, as you said, if you travel in a plane, you can see from Concorde, and I've been privileged to be on Concorde, that the Earth is definitely curved.
Well, he said that was because the windows create a fisheye effect.
No way. Absolutely no way. The thing is, if you, say, travel down on holiday to Australia or New Zealand, you see totally different constellations, proving that you're actually looking out in a different direction from the Earth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The other, I was going to mention Felix Baumgartner as well, who's come up on Twitter a bit, who's the fella who did, you might remember, the highest ever parachute jump. So he went up into the edge of space.
Yes.
And it was all filmed, and he was looking down, and it didn't just look like a circle. It looked like it was a sphere.
Exactly. And I'll come to another really fun story, by the way, talking associated with parachute jumps. Back in March, there was a flat earthist called Mad Mike Hughes. Google him, because it is the most amazing video that you can watch on YouTube. What he did, he's a limo driver from California, and believe it or not, he built a rocket in his garage, big enough for him to go up above the Mojave Desert in California, to a height of about 2,000 feet. And it was he did that to prove that the Earth was flat. He came back in a rather, let's say, dilapidated state, but it hasn't put him off. He's going to make more rockets, build them in his garage, and go up into space proper to prove the Earth is flat.
Okay, let me bring in Steve Fuller, who's listening in Rushden, Northamptonshire. Stephen, despite what the scientists have just said, you're not to be swayed. You believe the Earth is flat, is that right?
I totally 100% too. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yes, as for Felix, he went up, it took him 2.5 hours to get to the height that he was jumping from.
Yeah.
He took off from Mexico. With the Coriolis effect, 2.5 hours, the Earth should have travelled thousands of miles from underneath him. He landed 50 miles away from his launch site. So that disproves that. But anyway, the footage from that, yes, it was curved, but as it comes down and the camera angle moved, it was convex, it was it was going all sorts of shapes because of the fisheye lens. But anyway, that's to do with fisheye lenses.
You discovered the Earth was... You think you discovered the Earth was flat when your satellite dish fell off your roof, I understand?
Pretty much, yeah. My satellite dish packed up, so I was on YouTube. Started looking into the moon landings because I loved space, the moon. Wow. Let's have a look at these images from the moon. And there's a wonderful video on there called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, where they've got unedited NASA footage from the Apollo mission. They absolutely 100% faked that famous first.
It is clear from these rarely seen color television pictures that the crew of Apollo 11 high-resolution color video camera with them on their mission. Yet the only pictures broadcast live from the moon's surface were these from a low-definition black and white camera. In fact, the networks complained because in addition to this, they were forced to shoot the images, second generation, off of a projection TV of the technology of 30 years ago, and were not even allowed to take a direct feed, which further degraded the quality and clarity of the images. Perhaps this was precisely what NASA and the federal government had in mind. After all, it was a first, regardless of where they were. Better to open up their debut mission with fuzzy pictures and numerous blackouts, rather than show too much revealing detail of a false scene that was yet unproven. And finally, the element that seals their fate. All the footage of Apollo 11 requested from NASA over a 5-year period. One gem was discovered just before the completion of this documentary. An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr. and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Furthermore, it is apparent they are in genuine zero gravity of the actual spacecraft, necessary to convince the mass media of their authenticity, just not any further than Earth orbit, as you will see. In this never-before-seen or heard footage, not only is the radio conversation between the astronauts and Houston Control audible, there is a secondary, private conversation taking place between the crew and a third confidential party, prompting the astronauts with what to say, when to speak, and how to effectively manipulate the camera to achieve the desired misleading effect. NASA claims that the Houston transmissions were the only ones taking place with the astronauts. Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with, "Talk." Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger. We're nothing in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private. Until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're so much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from any other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue cast. See white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth. And
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up to see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away? Furthermore, if they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? Why this trickery with the window? By faking being halfway to the moon, it becomes apparent that they did so because they could not even go halfway. On the 25th anniversary of the event in 1994, Neil Armstrong made a rare public appearance and held back tears as he spoke these brief cryptic remarks before the next generation of taxpayers.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you, that is, undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
Of the Earth from space.
I think Heather doesn't
Can
agree.
I interject?
Yes.
And say that I have met many astronauts. They are very, very brave people indeed.
Well, they are.
And I have absolutely no doubt from having talked to many astronauts, had dinner with them and everything like that, had lots of glasses of wine too, that they have been to the moon. And they're one particular astronaut, Al Bean, is an artist, and we swapped copies of our books when I was filming him a few weeks ago, and he actually used his moon boot with dust on it to actually stamp an implant on every single one of his oil paintings, and there you actually have real moon dust come from an astronaut's boot on a lovely painting. Of course they went there, and we actually denigrate them by saying it was a conspiracy.
Steve, it does strike me that Neil Armstrong, who seemed to be an absolutely lovely, modest man who died quite recently, would have to be the most awful liar if all he did was step out of a plastic box in a studio.
No, not at all. These guys are really good actors, and they're paid really well, of course.
Sorry.
No. So the interview after the Apollo landing, where the four of them are sitting there discussing their fantastic achievement. We've just got back to the moon. They're sitting there all straight-faced, all silent, nudging each other when they say the wrong thing about being able to see stars. Some of them can see stars, some of them can't see stars. There's some sort of problem here.
Okay, well,
where the
let me just
astronauts are giving different information.
Okay, but back to you, Heather. I feel we should go back to the person who studied this for life. The first speaker said there's an issue with gravity not existing.
Of course gravity exists, and basically Galileo actually tested it out by dropping a feather and a ball off the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it's actually quite true that Isaac Newton, who was at Cambridge and sent back to his home in Woolsthorpe Manor in Lincolnshire because the plague was hitting London and they were worried about it hitting Cambridge. He did see the apple fall. I've actually seen the tree from which it fell. The earth attracted the apple, and the apple attracted the earth. And put it this way, think of all the space missions we've had. They all rely on gravity. We have a thing called gravity assist, which if you send a space probe to, say, a massive planet like Jupiter, wang it round for a few weeks, it speeds up the space probe. Gravity is an amazing force. It does exist. What I will say is we don't know what causes it. So that's something to be researched.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather Cooper, space expert, and also our listeners as well. Ian Wilson emails, I'm a consultant geodesist geodesist. You take a pick. Ask the flat earthers how they explain the GPS system, which is fundamentally based on the existence of the Earth as, and this is the correct term, I think, an oblate spheroid. This is a system on which our military and an increasing proportion of our transport system rely on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Greg Cowles in Norwich says, I used to have a friend who believed that the Earth was flat, but I stopped being friends with him because he annoyed me so much. Flat earthers refuse to accept the true size of the Earth. It's not the only thing. Hang on, we've got some evidence here. Paul Martin in Inverness says, I did a zero-gravity flight where you fly to the edge of the atmosphere. We took off from Texas, we flew upwards for ages, and the Earth definitely looked curved. Paul Price in Rugby disagrees. He says, we've definitely been deceived. The world is flat. It's obvious because there is no curvature. There are no clear photos of the world. They're all just cartoons. Gravity is just a theory. I'm the sort of person who doesn't just believe what I'm told. We have to question things. Thank you, Paul. But again, Andrew Denley emails, he's been to the edge of the world, so-called. He says, is this guy for real? I've worked in Antarctica. I can guarantee there's no ice wall. This man is allowed to vote. Oh yeah, local elections are coming, aren't they? BBC Radio 2 online, on digital radio and on 88 to 91 FM. Do stay here.